Did we have you at the edge of your seats? Welcome everyone to the Thrills, Chills, and Things Gone Wrong Q&A. My name is Victoria Ju, and I'm the co-director for the Seattle Asian American Film Festival. I want to thank all of our filmmakers here for sharing your films and joining us today. Let's start with a quick round of introductions, your name, film, and role. Devin, you want to go first?
All right, I'll go first. Hi, my name is Devin E. Haqq. I'm the writer and director of The Mark.
Okay, I'm Raymond C. I'm the writer-director of Logan Lee the Rise of the Purple Dawn.
Hey, I'm Cavan Campbell. I'm the co-writer and director of Receiver.
Hi, my name is Tahirih Vejdani, and I play the role of Shriani in Receiver.
Hi, my name is Chanelle Wang. I'm the writer and actor of the film Evan at the Crack of Dawn.
All right, so although most of your films were completed in the later half of last year, they're probably not COVID-inspired films. So even though they're very relevant to our, given our current events, and we have a lot of the writers here today. So if you could tell us about what inspired you to write or make this film, and for our actresses, what drew you to the role? And in Chanelle's case, maybe if you want to start first, did you write the script knowing that you were going to play the character of Dawn?
Yes, I did. I am somebody who just is very impatient, and I love creative control over things. So it was my excuse to get something done and made and tailored towards something that I'm interested in playing and in working with. So that was a huge part. And also, to be honest, the person who played Evan, I really wanted to write a role for him. Like, I really love writing roles for friends because I love to see them work. So that's what got me started.
Nice.
What inspired me to write this movie was, my wife and I were expecting our first child, and I was in that place where I wanted to create something new, and I didn't really have the idea, but the pregnancy and all the anxiety that I was going through with, getting ready to become a father, it was all the joy, but also all the terror and anxiety is really what inspired me to write this story and make this movie. And I was able to, through the medium of cinema, I was able to sort of explore all those emotions and feelings that I had and put it into something productive.
My film was inspired primarily by just my life and my experience as like a 20-year-old in college, which I'm no longer, and that is far in my rear view. But I think I started conceiving of this idea a long time ago, and it is about, sort of my time as a DJ and my time with recreational drugs, and also I think this isn't really an inspiration for why I wrote it, but an inspiration as to why I made it. I think just the circumstances of my life was kind of like, I had been doing some films that I didn't feel were necessarily very personal to me. And I decided like I should probably go back to doing something that I found incredibly personal and was very much inspired by my own experiences. And so that was the other reason why I undertook the project.
In my case, when my co-writer and I, when Luke Higginson and I started conceptualizing Receiver, my then girlfriend was working, she's a social worker, and she was working as a telephone counselor at a helpline. And through getting the chance to see her experiences, I got a window into the level of empathy and emotional labor that's basically required of a social worker by both their employers and also their clients. And the more Luke and I started to think about that, the more it sort of started to scare us in the way that empathy, which is basically the bedrock of the modern social work industry, is really quite commoditized a lot of the time within the industry. And, the more we commoditize somebody's empathy, the more that empathy can be weaponized against them. And so when we started fooling around with those ideas, it became really clear to us that Receiver wanted to be a psychological horror film. And when that sort of became known, we then started working on what would be a good metaphorical corollary for the kind of emotional content we were trying to tell. And that's when we happened upon the idea of hypnotic seduction as kind of a way into the actual pragmatic aspect of the story. So
to answer your question about what drew me to the role, I was really inspired to see this strong South Asian character written by Cavan, and in a storyline that's more than just the immigrant story. That was really about as he addressed this person and how they identify with the work that they do as a social worker, and seeing kind of the emotional toll that it takes on this individual, and then the interesting kind of how they navigate or don't navigate so well this manipulation that's happening, and how they live so much in this world of sound. It was also really interesting, that device, that the whole thing is just on one person, and everything and everyone that she interacts is through her headset and through this world of sound. So a lot of those things really drew me to this script.
Yeah, that kind of segues me into my next question is, why this genre for your film? So some of them are thrillers and some of them are more sci-fi-esque films. So what drew you to choose this genre for your story?
I saw mine's a sci-fi film primarily, at least I consider it to be a sci-fi sort of more of a comedy than it is anything else from a sci-fi comedy. And sci-fi, it's just, it's one of my favorite genres to explore. But also, I think for this one specifically, a big inspiration for me writing the film was a specific hip hop album. Which is Deltron 3030 by the group Deltron 3030, which is a sci-fi themed sort of concept album by Dan the Automator, Kid Koala, and Del the Funky Homo Sapien. Shout out to Dan the Automator, who was our composer. Thank you for working on the project. And so that was a big reason. There was like, well, there's only like, this was a big inspiration on this film. There's really, because of that sci-fi route, obviously for me, there was really only one way to go about it, was to approach it as a sci-fi film. And so, but also I think sci-fi allows an exploration and a reflection of reality in a way that, for me, I'm not a realist filmmaker. I'm just not, generally by nature. And so I always like something that are higher concept. And so even in this film where I wanted to sort of explore my thoughts on sort of connection and between human beings, I still, for me, needed it to have it be a sci-fi film because I felt more comfortable exploring those themes through the convention of science fiction than just a straight narrative. And that maybe is just a reflection of me as a person and a filmmaker and where my interests lie, but that's me.
All my previous projects were artistic films, passion projects. One was a Shakespeare adaptation and the other was a modern noir film, sort of like a homage to those French New Wave noir films from back in the day. And so a lot of the feedback I was getting from sales reps was that, these are great, but they aren't marketable because there aren't any famous people in them. And so they're really just like art house movies. And so I was sort of forced to think about like, what genre am I really passionate about that's also sort of has commercial appeal, and I need to create sort of a calling card that is in that genre so people can see that my work is broader than sort of like what the previous projects have put forward. And I love horror films, one of my earliest memories of watching cinema was The Exorcist when I was like, I think I was like 8 years old when I saw that movie. And so like, I just love the genre, and that's the genre I really would want to work in. If I had my dream, it would be like sci-fi thrillers and horror. So that's why I made this movie. And it also fit emotionally with what I was going through, in my life and my personal experience, and what sort of inspired the movie. The anxiety I was feeling about this child coming into my life was like nothing I'd ever had in my experience before. So it just fit with the goals that I had set forward.
In our case, as I sort of alluded to, it was really the material that dictated the genre that it was going to be. Because the more we thought about this kind of story we wanted to tell, the more it kind of creeped us out. And that sort of pointed us in the direction of making it a psychological horror film.
I think I might be the outlier here in terms of genre, but I think there is that sort of magical realism that's involved with our film, because it is dealing with a human being and then an angel. And I think for me, when I first started writing this story, it was just a story about two broken people who each wanted something that the other person had. And I was thinking a lot about morality, what dictates good, what's bad. And I think the symbolism of good, for me at least at the time when I was writing, I thought, okay, angels are above all like the greatest symbols of what represents good and innocence and light. And so I just sort of allowed myself to play with the theme of good and what it would look like if this broken human being was talking to someone else who he perceived as good, but found out that no, this angel has a dark side. So I found that to be really fun, and it just ended up turning into sort of a magical realism story.
I wanted to also ask, since these, I don't know if these films wrapped before COVID quarantine and all that, but did you have any big blockers in your filmmaking process? And if COVID even, inhibited it even more, or if there were other bigger kind of roadblockers during the filmmaking process?
COVID wasn't really much of an issue for us. I mean, ironically, we completed all the post-production on Receiver exactly 1 week before Toronto ended up in lockdown the very first time, which I would like to not recommend to anybody in the future to be a good time to wrap a film. I think in our case, probably the biggest roadblock that we had to deal with was in the prep for the film, and it came to funding. The funding situation for independent films in Canada right now is not terribly great. We spent about 2 years trying to get the film financed, and were turned down by every public and private fund that we were eligible for. So in the end, I decided the only way this film was going to happen was I was just going to have to fund it myself. So that was probably the biggest thing to getting Receiver off the ground. But, I think that's probably a refrain that a lot of independent filmmakers can echo. Hopefully not on this actual panel, though. I hope everybody had a better game of funding their films.
Yeah, I would say actually, of all my experiences, this was the luckiest or easiest to finance. But I don't think that had anything to do with the movie or the product. I think it was just like timing of when I was making it. The biggest roadblocker for me was like, I'd never worked with a baby before on set, and that was like really hard. And what we ended up doing to mitigate it was cast two babies, and one baby was the baby whose face we saw, and the other baby was for the angles where we were behind the head, so we're just constantly switching them out. And there were moments when like the shot wasn't coming off right because the baby was not cooperating, and then I would just say, okay, we got it, just get that little bit that the editor can use. And the DP was not like satisfied, so there was a little bit of tension and just like, no, we got to get this perfect. I'm like, this baby is not going to let us get this perfect. We have to be grateful for whatever we get and move on because time is ticking. And the other thing was, this is the first time I ever used a drone in a movie, and a couple of times we got ran off by the park rangers, and we had to like come back weeks later and pick up the shot because we couldn't get it in the moment. But other than that, it was like a pretty smooth production. The baby was by far the biggest challenge, and I feel like we handled it really well considering.
I think for our production, from my recollection, anyhow, one of the biggest hindrances wasn't actually during production; it was actually during post, which was I don't know if anyone on this panel has had to deal with this, but it was music clearance. And generally indie films, especially short films, we don't have much of a budget for music clearance, right? I mean, it's just music licensing I'd never really had to deal with music licensing to this degree before. I now understand why there's entire departments for that. So what happened was that one of the songs that I really want to use, only one song that I was trying to license basically at this point, was by, the composer of our film. So I was like, oh, great, this will not be a problem to clear this song. I was mistaken. And so I ended up going through months of going back and forth between the label and the publishing, because the artists had signed off. They were great with it. And so I spent about 7 months trying to clear this song. And this was just festival rights. This was going to be need to be renegotiated after festival run again, if should it ever hit the internet. And so it was already a significant amount of money for an indie film to clear the song for 1 year for international festival rights. But I did it. I went through the whole process. Like I said, it took about 7 months all in all. And then at the 11th hour, I get a call from the manager of the artist saying, actually, I'm sorry, we can't clear that song, because we were just reminded that there was a sample that we never cleared in that song, and so we can't have it go out in the public. And I was just like, okay, great. But it ended up being a nice the silver lining of all that was that, you know, it forced me to be more resourceful in trying to find an alternate piece of music, an alternate cue. And actually, due to COVID, I had a lot more time on my hands. I, you know, was a musician in high school and college, and I kind of took some time away from music because I had a kid, and my son's a little bit older now, so I had more time to sort of refocus back on music. And I actually ended up composing a couple of pieces of music for the film that I then now will no longer have to pay any licensing fees for. I wouldn't have to renegotiate for, you know, should I ever go digital, whatever. So it ended up working out to our benefit and saving money on so, you know, lemonade's kind of situation that actually resulted because of COVID, because I had the time, because we were done theoretically, I think like Kevin was saying, like just before the lockdown happened, we just kind of just finished. But then because of the lockdown, we actually had opportunities to revisit and do these things that I actually ended up recutting the movie in COVID, and I think made the film a lot stronger. So anyhow, that was our biggest hindrance, was that on the post side.
Well, I don't have much to go off of because this is my very first film that I've ever written, but I will say I did learn a lot. Everything that you guys have all talked about, I feel like I've had a taste of. Like we had to crowdfund the entire film, and I learned firsthand just how difficult it is to raise money. Like ever since that experience, I just look at every film and I am in awe that it gets made. Like the fact that something gets made is a miracle to me now. So I have such appreciation for filmmakers and what they do and how much they have to love their project, because it is so much work. And so I would say that the biggest challenge for me was just learning everything all at once. And so it was a very, very fulfilling experience, but my God, was it exhausting.
So, but the acting part came easy for you.
Oh yeah, as soon as I was able to step on set, I was like, okay, you guys handle that now. Let me just do my thing. But I mean, I wouldn't be able to. I would say like actually being on set, everything was very, very smooth, and that's large part in our director Roxy. She's a mighty, mighty captain, and she made everyone feel so taken care of. Like, I don't know, there's something very maternal, I would say, about being a director as well, because you have to you have to answer to so many people. You have to make people feel seen and heard and validated with what they're giving to you. And she made everybody feel comfortable. Like, I was very suspicious about that. Like, I was like, what kind of magic are you working here? Because everything is like suspiciously going very well on set. So I mean, I have to give it up to Roxy. She really just made us feel very, very comfortable on set.
And Tahirih, did you have any challenges as an actress in, you know, in your role of playing the character?
I think the biggest challenge was, well, probably being the only person on set and having all of kind of everything that I'm doing interacting kind of external. So I think something that was done really nice to kind of mitigate that was having Cavan had all the other actors who would have been like in my headset just off camera for me to interact with. So it wasn't some other voice or someone else that was playing those parts while we were shooting it. And I found that very helpful because I actually could play with those actors rather than them being, you know, recorded in later. And so I think that was a little bit of a challenge, but they resolved that one. Man, I'm trying to think back what the biggest challenges were. I think the hardest challenge was actually the switch from playing Shriani to playing the devil. And it was at the height of what was going on. And when they were doing that amazing shot where you pan and you see me in both shots, having just played at the height of the panic and anxiety that Shriani is playing, to then getting out of character, quickly changing costumes and trying to get in these last few shots because we're at their very last day and we have to get in everything of the devil in there. So having to shift gears very quickly, very fast, and coming out of the emotional height of that one character and going into the very, very powerful presence that this new being is right away. I found that challenging. But I was very lucky to have my double, Mina James, there, who was just kind of my very grounded presence and who was with us in the rehearsal process towards building Shriani and the devil, and having someone who understood both sides and was able to ground me in the moment of shifting and the hustle and bustle of everything going on. I think that was maybe the most challenging. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds, I loved how you portrayed your character in your film. I think you did a really good job. So so kind of going off of that, for a lot of these films, being, sci-fi thriller, a lot of it depends on sound, and also a lot of it depends on the post, where you have a lot of the visual effects added and stuff. But I feel like for the filmmakers that are here, at least to me as a viewer, it didn't seem like you needed to use extra visual effects to kind of create that magical or fictional story that you're telling. Do you, as filmmakers, do y'all have any maybe advice for other filmmakers who are creating films in this genre?
Well, I think that's a couple of really good observations there. I would almost say, from my experience, the trick is that there is no trick. It all comes down to prep. Receiver was the first film that I directed that really had any amount of visual effects in it. I'm a real Luddite when it comes to filmmaking, and literally every film I've made before this was shot on film. So this was one of those things that, in order to feel like we were going to be ready, I started prepping for what the visual effects were going to be. We knew we had a couple of key sequences that were going to require motion control shots and visual effects, and I started prepping about 3 months before we shot with my visual effects supervisor. And yeah, so the trick is simply, if you don't have money and you don't have time when you're going to be on set and in post where everything costs money, you've just got to spend the time in prep when it doesn't actually cost that much money at all.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. I think prep, just in general, as a filmmaker, is the most important thing, especially as a director. It's the biggest part of the job. And I would just say too, it really goes back to story. I think you want to do what's required for your story, and oftentimes you find that it doesn't necessarily mean there has to be some crazy special effect. If all your choices are based on what's going to enhance and help me tell the best story, if that's your guiding principle, then you may come across moments like in our film. There was definitely, at the climax, there was, we could have maybe gone with the in-camera, cheesy costume or something to create that entity, but I just didn't think that was going to serve the story that I was telling. So I needed the special effect there. But there were other moments where I wanted to create tension or scares earlier in the film that, it's like, well, this really is just a sound, or this is just like the way we adjust the camera, so I think story is always the guiding principle, and not thinking about what would be cool or what would be like what I want to try because I just want to do it. It's like, what is the best thing for the story? And you never go wrong if that's your sort of your guiding principle.
Yeah, to echo off what both Devin and is it Cavan or Kevin? I'm sorry, I apologize if I mispronounced your name earlier. okay. Anyhow, I highly agree with both sentiments. Like, yeah, absolutely, story is number one, and having familiarity with what you're trying to do and what narrative you're trying to tell is absolutely paramount. To echo Cavan's point about prep, and speaking with your visual effects supervisor early, like I've done a few, sort of more visual effects intensive projects, but this was the first project I'd done where I had the good fortune of having my VFX supervisor both ahead of time, which is something I'd never had before in pre-production, and then who was gracious and generous enough to volunteer to come down, because he's actually from Washington. He came down to set and just hung out with us on set, and that was invaluable resource that I'd never had before, just being able to say, hey, we're trying to do the shot. This is the one we talked about. Can we have a powwow quickly with the DP and just say like what practical light gag do we need to have fixed? So there's like literally one shot where someone was just holding a purple beam, a purple like small hand light above the camera, just tracking with the camera so that we could create, a source of light for the creature's eyes, for instance. And so that was something, again, not everybody will have, an incredibly generous VFX supervisor like we did. We were very, very lucky. Thankfully, he had a very good relationship with our producer. But if you're fortunate enough to be able to have at least your VFX supervisor ready to go in pre-production as opposed to getting them in post, which is what I've done in the past, yeah, that's invaluable. But that also ties in all the things that they already mentioned, just having your story in mind and then having prep.
Chanelle, do you have anything to add? I'm super curious if that set for your film, was that in one house?
That was on location. I wish our director Roxy or our producer Teresa was here, because I love listening to that story. So basically, they were going location scouting that day. I think they had, I don't remember how many locations that they were going to scout, but the locations that you see in the film was the very first scouting. And once they walked in, they just knew. And they had a little conversation and they were saying something like, well, do we even need to scout? Because this is the one. And so I think, judging by the way they were talking about that story, it seems like that's not something that happens very often for filmmakers or for location scouting. Like, usually you want to scout all the locations, but they just saw it and they just knew. And it worked out so beautifully, because for those who have seen the film, like the location is a character in and of itself. It's so filled with life. And I felt like it connected very much with what Evan's mind was like, very, very cluttered. There was warmth in it too, because it was connected to his mother. And so it was, I would say like that was our biggest visual. And also like just a little tidbit, like at the top of the film, there is a brief moment where this cloud hovers over the dilapidated house. And that was huge parts to our cinematographer, Daphne Wu, because I think she was getting the shot ready and she saw the cloud coming in from the far end. And she told Roxy, she's like, just wait about 20 to 30 minutes for this cloud to pass by beautifully over the house. And so Roxy was just like, okay, you do you. And that's what I love about Roxy. She just like, she's not afraid to admit when she doesn't know something, and she fully trusts her team. So if somebody suggests an idea, I can see her saying like, okay, let's give it a try. She's never, there is no, at least from my perspective when working with her, I didn't see any sort of ego with her. So when Daphne suggested the cloud roll over, it looked awesome. It looked like some sort of special effect, but it wasn't. It was just thanks to Daphne's genius decision.
That sounds amazing. Yeah, sometimes, nature is the best visual effects. So to kind of wrap it up, when I was watching some of these films, it seemed like the story wasn't done yet. So I read some of your press kits, and I know a few of you are turning these shorts into full-length features. If you all can kind of talk about how our audience can follow your work and any other projects that you might be working on.
Luke Higginson, my co-writer on Receiver, he and I are actually working on the feature adaptation of the film right now. I don't know when that's going to get finished at this point, because life has a habit of getting in the way. And anyway, I have a separate chamber horror feature project called Freight All Kinds that's written and going into development this spring. So we'll see what happens with that. I can be found online at www.interlockpictures.com. On Facebook and Instagram, I'm at Interlock Pictures. And if you want to listen to my random noodlings on Twitter, you can find me at C Cam Operator.
There aren't any plans right now for the Mark to be developed into a feature. If someone expresses interest in that and they're willing to pay for it, then I'm going to go down that road. But I actually wrote a new feature-length screenplay during the whole COVID lockdown. That's how I spent my time. And so I'm in development on that right now, and I'm really excited about it. It's a sci-fi horror film about a crew of astronauts that are headed to Jupiter, and they come in contact with an alien virus that sort of runs through the entire crew. Of course, a virus story came out of the pandemic, but yeah, I'm really excited about it. Actually having a virtual reading in a couple weeks with some really great actors. So there's that. If you can follow me on, actually, if you just Google my name, Devin E. Haqq, Haqq. My website has links to my Instagram and Facebook and all that stuff. So yeah, I'm not hard to find. Just Google my name and all the stuff pops up.
Yeah, well, so Logan Lee and the Rise of the Purple Dawn was actually based on a feature I wrote several years ago, just before I had my son. And so now I'm in the process of sort of rewriting that and reapproaching it, because I think, as expectedly, my perspective and just the way I look at things has changed drastically since having a child, and since, compared to before. So I'm in the process of rewriting that, but I would say I wasn't great about that during the pandemic. And so I kind of wrote 2 other pilots instead to kind of just like take on something that was like maybe a bit more manageable. And so those are in active development as well, with the same producer that I did Logan Lee with, because they're both sort of either hybrid or fully animated or partially animated projects. And I also have a comic book series that I'm developing about an intergalactic bounty hunter who also happens to be a huge stoner. So it'll be a lot of fun. Yeah, and you can find me primarily on Instagram, I guess, just Raymond C at Raymond C. That's the easiest thing to talk about. Yeah. And thank you for.
As for Evan, we don't have any plans on expanding this into a feature. Although I have been getting a lot of questions about people wondering Dawn's origin and how she became to be an angel, because I wrote an entire backstory for her. So as the actress, I would know where she was coming from. But who knows? I mean, like, I never say never. But I would say, like Raymond, I wrote a pilot just to get my mind off the pandemic and just do something creative. But I would say for me, it's I've been studying a lot more, just watching and reading first before I write, especially now. I don't know how people are adjusting to writing and making films during a pandemic. Like, it's already hard making films in general. So adding this to it, I'm so mind blown. I really am, by filmmakers. But I would say, in terms of plug, I would love to plug Roxy. You can find her. I love her so much at Roxy She, SHIH. She also has this amazing podcast, by the way, called Two Horny Goats. Yes, Two Horny Goats, that she co-hosts with her friend who's a singer and songwriter named Priscilla Yang. It's like eavesdropping on a couple of like BFFs. They talk about everything, and it's just really fun to listen to. So I recommend that.
Well, I'll just say I look forward to whenever Cavan writes the supposed feature length film based off of Receiver. And no upcoming projects at the moment, but feel free to follow me at my name, Tahirih Vejdani, anywhere online. I'm sure you can find my my website and Facebook and Instagram.
Yeah, I love to see more of the double side of you in the future.
Same, yes, yeah. Flesh out that whole story.
Yeah. All right. Well, I want to thank all the filmmakers again for joining us today, and thank you, the viewers, for tuning in into the 9th annual Seattle Asian American Film Festival. We really appreciate your support. Thank you.